my Bill 1000 Nation. How's everyone doing today? Hopefully, everyone's having a great day. If not, I hope it gets better from here. We are back with a new MrBallen video. This one is titled, Never Take a Job from the Secret Organization. Never become 007. Or Charlie's Angels. Okay, whatever. I'm excited to get in today's video. Hopefully you guys are excited as I am. If you are, please go ahead, turn them lights down low, put on something comfy, cup of something special. Let's get concerned about evil secret organizations that make you do things you don't want to do even though they think it's right. I don't know. Let's just get terrified. I'm terrified. Fuck this shit.
Today's story is about a chance encounter between two men in Canada. Now, at first, these two men hit it off and became fast friends. But as time wore on, it became very clear that both men were keeping secrets from the other. And eventually, those secrets were exposed. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please reprogram the like button's TV remote so that every time they try to change the volume, it just turns off the TV. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Let's do it. Batman. The contest winner. I love winning contests. I never win.
One evening in late 2003, a 22-year-old man named Michael Bridges sat down in the stands of a professional hockey game in Calgary, which is a major city in Canada. And as he sat there staring out at the rink, waiting for the players to file in, he thought to himself how amazing it was that he was here right now. He couldn't believe how lucky he was to be here. So Michael lived about 700 miles away in a city called Brandon, which is also in Canada. And for the last year, Michael's life had gone really badly. He was struggling financially and in between jobs. He had gone through a recent terrible breakup. A lot of his friends had sort of vanished from his life. And so for the most part, he was sort of sad and lonely all the time. But then he'd won a sweepstakes that he had only entered on a whim and gotten an all expenses paid trip to Calgary for this hockey game. And so it felt like finally something good was happening in his life. Michael was about to flag down a vendor and order himself a beer when this guy he didn't know, this stocky guy with a mustache, walked in and sat down right next to Michael. And before Michael could say anything, this guy looked at him with a big smile on his face and he said, "Man, I'm so excited to be here. I won this ticket in a sweepstakes." And Michael was like, "Dude, me too." And so right away, these total strangers just totally hit it off. And before long, they were chatting about their lives. And, Michael, who over the last year, most of his friends had sort of disappeared in his life, it was great to have a guy that just seemed to get him. And so the time flew by. And Brock must have felt the same way about Michael because as the hockey game ended, Brock asked Michael if he wanted to, keep the party going and go together to a strip club right down the road. And Michael was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so the two new friends left the hockey game together, they went to the strip club, and as soon as they got there, Michael began to notice something odd about Brock, or at least something he hadn't noticed before. And that was that even though Brock appeared to be very blue collar, sort of like Michael was, Brock appeared to have a lot of money. I mean, he was leaving these huge tips for all the bartenders, and he was paying for he and Michael's drinks round after round. Brock was paying for all of it. And then also, Brock had this huge wad of ones and bills that he was basically throwing at all the dancers. And Michael, who was caught off guard by this, gladly accepted Brock's generosity. I mean, at this point, given Michael's financial struggles, he could not have afforded even a normal night out, let alone a lavish one like this. And so as the two men stood at the bar towards the end of the night, Michael thanked Brock for making this such a fun night, and he said he really didn't want to leave and go back to his hometown of Brandon, 700 miles away, because he was having so much fun here with Brock. But when he said Brandon, Brock stopped and he's like, "Wait a minute, Brandon? I'm moving to Brandon for work." And when Michael heard this, he was ecstatic. I mean, he was thinking this was going to be a one-off thing, that he would likely never see Brock again, despite how cool this guy was. But now it seemed entirely possible that if they were living in the same town, they could be actual friends. And so Brock told Michael that, "Hey, if you help me find an apartment in your hometown once I move there, maybe I can repay the favor by helping you get some work." And so Michael, he took one last look at that big wad of cash in Brock's hand, and he looked up at him and he said, "Deal." A couple of months later, in early December of 2003, Michael rode in the passenger seat of Brock's car as they made their way down a road in Brandon. The two had just had lunch together, and Brock was driving Michael home when suddenly Brock's phone rang. And when Brock answered it, Michael could tell right away, just from the tone of Brock's voice, that he was speaking to his boss. So ever since that hockey game, Michael and Brock had become friends. Brock had moved to Brandon, and Michael had helped him find an apartment, and in exchange, Brock had made good on his promise and had helped Michael find some work. In fact, he had gotten him a few odd jobs with the company that he, Brock, worked for. However, these jobs were not what Michael expected them to be, based on, his first impression of Brock. In reality, he felt like these jobs were kind of shady. Brock had asked Michael to start delivering these packages all over town, but he warned Michael to never look inside of any of these packages. Now, at first, obviously, Michael had been very unsure about taking Brock up on these jobs. I mean, it was pretty clear that whatever Brock was doing was, questionable or maybe even illegal. Like, what's going on with these packages? But, Michael thought back to that huge wad of cash that Brock had at the strip club in Calgary, and it just seemed like he was throwing money around. Michael wanted money like that too. And so he thought, what's the harm? And so ultimately, Michael agreed to deliver one of these packages, and when nothing bad happened, he began delivering more. Now, Michael still had no idea what he was actually delivering.
Drugs.
He had heeded the warning and was
Human
not
body
looking
parts.
inside these packages.
Boobs.
Instead, he had sort of accepted the shadowy, mysterious stuff that Brock was doing.
Frozen
was just sort of
boobs.
part of being friends with Brock and working for Brock. And so he had just gone along with it. And also, Michael genuinely needed the money. He really couldn't afford to just stop working. So as the two men continued down this road in Brandon, Michael just continued to sit quietly in the passenger seat while he listened to Brock speak to his boss. And at some point in this conversation, Brock looked very resigned and just said, "Okay, I'll take care of it right now." Then Brock abruptly hung up, and without saying anything to Michael, he just pulled a U-turn and began speeding in the opposite direction. And then a couple of minutes later, Brock pulled into this parking lot of the seedy hotel, and then before Michael could ask, what are we doing here? Brock turned to him and said, "You stay here." And then Brock got out of the car and he marched over to the door of this motel and began to knock. And Michael, he's in the car watching this, having no idea what's going on, and he sees the motel room door that Brock knocked on. It suddenly opened, and there was this woman who was inside the motel. And from Michael's perspective, it seemed like she was very startled to see Brock. And then she began trying to shut the door on Brock. But Brock, he reached out and he began pushing on the door to keep it open, and the two of them began yelling at each other. And Michael, he can't hear what they're yelling about, but clearly, they're having some sort of heated argument here. And at this point, Michael began looking around, hopeful that nobody was.
Is it like a prostitution thing or like pimp situation? I don't know.
Witnessing this, they could get in some serious trouble here. And then Michael turned his attention back to Brock and this woman, and he watched as Brock raised his fist and punched this woman square in the face. And she instantly crumpled to the ground, and Michael, he has no idea what to do here. And so he just sat there as Brock climbed on top of this woman who's laying on the ground, and he began repeatedly punching her over and over again until Michael could see blood all over her face. And then Brock, who seemed totally unfazed, slammed the motel room door and calmly walked back to the car, hopped in the driver's seat, and drove off without saying anything to Michael. And Michael just sat quietly for this ride. He really had no idea what to even say. Now, he already knew that Brock must be involved in some sort of criminal enterprise, and in virtue of Michael delivering those packages for him, he was also involved in whatever this organization did. But up until this point, up until seeing this beating take place, Michael had sort of assumed that whatever Brock was involved in couldn't be that big of a deal. Certainly they weren't hurting people.
Oh no!
But now Michael realized he had been terribly wrong. Finally, Brock pulled up in front of Michael's house, and for the first time he spoke. He turned to Michael and he said, "Don't tell anyone what you saw." And Michael just nodded his head and said, "Yeah, I won't." And then Michael got out of the car and he rushed inside his house.
What the fuck is this motherfucker into,
Thank
bro?
you to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video.
Rocket
I found out last
Money!
month that I was still paying for a subscription to a streaming service that I signed up for while we were on tour last year. I had signed up for this because I wanted to binge shows while we were on the road. I just forgot to cancel it. But today's
That happens,
sponsor,
man.
Rocket Money, not only identified for me that I was spending money on something that I didn't want, but they also canceled it for me. Once you connect your bank account, Rocket Money identifies all your subscriptions in a single list. From there, you can identify the ones that you don't want anymore, and Rocket Money may be able to help you cancel in just a few taps. I also love using Rocket Money for 3 other things. I use them to lower my bills, also to create a custom budget, and to increase my savings. All in one place. Let the app's negotiators go to work for you to find the best possible rate and to save you time. With Rocket Money, you can create a customized budget in seconds. The app shows you where your money is going at all times, and it will also notify you when your balance is low to avoid overdrafts and late fees. Rocket Money will help you choose a savings goal, then you simply pick your preferred savings frequency, and then you watch your savings grow. You can edit, pause, or withdraw at any time. Take control of your finances today. Go to rocketmoney.com/MrBallen to get started for free. Again, that's rocketmoney.com/MrBallen. Okay, back to the story. About a week later, Michael was at his home when his phone rang, and when he looked at the caller ID, he saw it was Brock. And at first, Michael couldn't help but feel like he didn't want to pick up the call, but he knew he would have to. Despite what had happened the previous week at the motel, Michael had not said anything to anyone. However, being loyal to Brock did not make him feel any better about it. In reality, Michael felt like at this point, he was in too deep with Brock, and he had no idea how to get out again, even though at this point, he kind of wanted to. But for now, Michael had made the conscious decision to simply act like everything is the same, everything is normal, so he didn't raise any red flags with Brock. And so, he ultimately picked up the phone. Brock didn't say hello or ask Michael how he was doing. Instead, he just told Michael that he had another delivery for him if Michael was still committed to this job. Now, Michael knew the right answer here would be to turn this down and not continue to go down this rabbit hole and get deeper and deeper in with Brock. But at the same time, Michael was worried if he refused this job that he might be put in danger. Like he saw what Brock was capable of. Is that going to happen to him if he turns this down?
I was thinking money. I was thinking about getting my ass beat.
Michael needed the money. And so after a tense silence, Michael told Brock that yes, I'm still committed and I will do this delivery. Brock said that was very good. And he also told Michael that he and the boss were very impressed with Michael's silence. And then Brock hung up. Now, Michael did appreciate the compliment, but at the same time, it really did not change his situation at all.
It's
he was still in way too deep here
think.
and didn't know what he was going to do. And so reluctantly, he grabbed his keys and headed out to his car to go pick up this next package. 2 months later, in early February of 2004, Michael and Brock sat inside of a diner in Brandon eating a meal together. Things at this point had basically gone back to normal. Michael was regularly delivering packages for Brock, and the two of them were meeting for meals like this fairly often, where Brock would always foot the bill. But today, as Michael sat there staring at Brock, he could tell something was different. Brock seemed really agitated, like something was on his mind. He kept tapping his hand and kind of fidgeting in his seat. And eventually, Michael asked Brock, like, hey, are you okay? And to Michael's surprise, Brock kind of lit up. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm okay. In fact, things are more than okay. I actually have an offer for you that could potentially change your life. Brock again told Michael that he and the boss were seriously impressed with Michael's work so far. Not just the fact that he kept silent about the motel incident, but also they knew Michael clearly had not looked inside of any of those packages. And so collectively, this proved that Michael was dependable and loyal. And so he told Michael that what he wanted to do was introduce Michael to the boss, because he thought maybe the boss would take a liking to Michael and move him up in the organization. Maybe give him a more managerial role like Brock's, where the role was more prestigious and had more responsibility, but critically came with higher pay. After hearing this, Michael felt both excited and nervous. He was excited because he wanted nothing more than to make the kind of money that Brock did. And after working with Brock now for several months, Michael had become kind of desensitized to violence and danger. He realized he could put his morals aside if it meant he would never have to be financially insecure ever again. But the thing that made Michael nervous was meeting the boss. I mean, he really didn't know much about who this guy was. All he knew is he was perfectly prepared to resort to violence if people wronged him. And so Michael knew how critical it was to stay on this guy's good side. But as all these conflicting thoughts were swirling around Michael's head, Brock said something else. He said before he would actually take Michael to meet the boss, Michael had to pass one more test. Michael would have to prove that he was capable of more than simply delivering packages and keeping secrets. Basically, he needed to prove that he could be as cutthroat and brutal as Brock was. After saying this, Brock just kind of leaned back and stared at Michael, studying his reaction. And at first, Michael really didn't even know what to say or do. He was like, okay, is Brock expecting me to come up with, some sort of way that I can demonstrate this? Do I need to come up with a test myself and do it? Or is Brock about to give me some assignment? Like, what's going on here? But then, before Brock could say anything else to clarify this whole situation, Michael had this epiphany. He suddenly realized that he already had the proof he needed to demonstrate to Brock and to the boss that he could basically handle anything they threw at him. Before meeting Brock, something truly awful and just totally messed up happened in Michael's life, and Michael had persevered his way through it. And so Michael was thinking to himself,
Have we heard this one? I know it's a new MrBallen, but didn't this dude do like something shady? I don't know if he like killed somebody or not, but aren't these the cops that he's doing stuff for? Okay, if we have heard this before, then Bert, whatever the fuck his name is Popo, and the boss is Popo. I'm pretty sure it's the Popo. And this dude actually did like kill somebody or rob somebody or something like that. And this is how they was trying to catch him.
if he just told the story of what happened to Brock and to the boss, they would be convinced that he was their guy. And so, feeling very confident, Michael looked Brock right in the eye and he told him about his past. And as he told the story, Brock's eyes went wide. And by the end of the story, when Michael finally finished up, Brock just said, "Okay, yeah, you're ready to meet the boss." The meeting with the boss was scheduled for a few days later. And on that day, Michael showed up to this fancy hotel in a nearby city. And when he walked into the lobby, he saw Brock was sitting there waiting for him. When Brock saw Michael, he smiled and stood up, gestured for Michael to come over, and then the two of them walked upstairs to a particular hotel room. But when Brock unlocked the hotel room door and the two men went inside this lavish suite with this gorgeous living room and an amazing view, Michael looked around and realized it was empty. And he said to Brock, like, "Where's the boss?" And Brock said, "The boss doesn't wait for anyone. People wait for the boss. And so just sit down, he'll be here soon." And so Michael said okay, and he took a seat and tried to stay calm. But in reality, he was very nervous. I mean, all this cloak and dagger stuff was really putting him on edge. He also knew he had to impress the boss when he got here, because if he did, he would have like this new lease on life, this big promotion, he'd be getting paid so much money. But if he didn't, if he failed to impress the boss, not only would he potentially be out of a job and back to sort of poverty, but also he could be in real danger here. And so as Michael is sitting there showing all the signs that he's totally nervous, Brock, who was in the room just kind of standing there, looked over and could sense, his friend clearly is on edge. And so he said, "Hey, Michael, here we go. Why don't you just run me through your story one more time, like a dry run, before you meet the boss. Get yourself ready." And so Michael, who at this point was so anxious, he was happy to be doing anything other than just sitting there quietly, quickly agreed to the idea and went through his story one more time. And right as he finished his story, there was a knock on the door. And so Brock said, "Okay, he's here. Are you ready?" And Michael's like, "Yeah, I'm ready." And so Brock walked over to the door, took one more look at Michael, opened it up, and when Michael looked outside and saw who was out there, he knew immediately he had made a terrible mistake. It would turn out the last several months of Michael's life was one big lie. That sweepstakes that Michael had won that got him the tickets to the game in Calgary, that wasn't real. somebody had set that up just so Michael could meet Brock. Those packages that Michael was delivering for Brock, they were not sensitive. It was just packages that contained flour, like cooking flour. And that woman that Michael watched Brock beat up at the motel, she was acting, and so was Brock. Nobody got hurt in that entire altercation, and the blood that Michael saw on her face, well, she had blood capsules hidden in her mouth that she popped to make it look like she actually got beat up. However, there was one thing that was absolutely true about the last few months of Michael's life, and that was that Brock really was involved in a secretive organization, and Brock really did want to bring Michael inside of it. It's just that the organization was not the criminal enterprise that Michael thought it was. Instead, it was the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And Brock was an undercover officer running an elaborate sting designed entirely to get Michael to confess to his crimes, which he did while secret cameras inside of that hotel room recorded every single word he said. Michael's crime was murder. 2 years earlier, his girlfriend, Erin Chorney, had tried to break up with him, and he'd been so mad about it that he attacked her, wound up strangling her until she fell unconscious, and then he drowned her in the bathtub. And so this was the story he told Brock and intended to tell the boss to convince them that he was their guy, that he was tough and could do anything they wanted. He basically was telling them, hey guys, I'm literally a murderer. And so when they heard that knock on the door in the hotel room and Michael turned, expecting it to be the boss, well, instead, he saw a whole bunch of police officers coming into the hotel room to arrest him for that murder that he confessed to. Erin's body was ultimately recovered from the dump site where Michael had left her, and she was given a proper burial. As for Michael, he was convicted of her murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Getting them booty cheeks clapped, Brett.
Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought.
Thank you so much for having me. Man, I know we've heard that. I don't know what channel we've watched it on, but I know we've heard that. It's still good. Oh, MrBallen is such a good... Oh, I love it. All right. I really enjoyed today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video as much as I did. If you did, please go down there. Leave a thumbs up. It really does help the channel grow. While you're down there, if you want, go on over, slap that subscribe button, become part of the B5 Nation. We do some crazy stuff here. If you want to know when that crazy stuff happens, ding that bell and turn on all notifications. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Damn, it's so good. It's so good. Man, I forgot to do this shit here. Man, I really need a... I know how to do YouTube. I swear I know how to do YouTube.